I'm going to invite Pete Grzonka to come and talk to us a little bit about how tech can help when you're preparing the office for this post-COVID world. What are the things that you might need to think about? Welcome, Pete.
Good afternoon, Richard, and thanks for having me back. And good afternoon, everyone else. So I work for a company called Tested Me. We've developed a digital health pass, which essentially allows people to upload their COVID health onto an app, and then demonstrate that health when they go back to the workplace, go back to play, go back to travel, go back to events and various different things. We work on the policy that if you can start from a position of verifying who the person is, so we ask you to biometrically verify your identity, it then allows you to share that data in a very GDPR compliant way, but also in a way that the individual can control. So you can control exactly who sees whatever data you've got, and you've also got a record of whoever you've actually shared that details with. I thought a really good example is actually, I was offered a firm this morning down in Basingstoke. They've got 190 people. There was a big range of people there. Some guys have been busy with their kids and off to sport and going to parties and dropping their kids off at school and popping in the office every now and then. And then there were other people there who potentially have been stuck in a front room working away for the last 18 months. So there's different levels of anxiety. And the way Tested Me works is you all record that you've had a test that week. If you're doing workplace testing, you record how you're feeling, you record if you've been vaccinated. And then what it does is it reduces that anxiety by allowing everybody to know that everybody within their organization has ticked the same boxes. And essentially, once you've ticked those boxes, you can crack on and work and play and do what you need to do. What was great to hear from a lot of people today was, oh, is that it? Once they set up their app and they verified their identity and uploaded a test, they just scanned in the mornings as if they were clicking on with a pass in a normal workplace. So it's great. The technology is certainly there to help out, and we're there kind of putting it into workplaces and putting it into other aspects of life as well. We did 1,000 employees, and then we also did a survey of 250 either managing owners or HR managers. And the stats that came back from that, there were 78% of employees who would either make a formal complaint or consider leaving their business if their company didn't make it, if they didn't take COVID seriously. So enabling your staff to know that you are taking it seriously and enabling to kind of demonstrate themselves, to get back into the workplace safely, really does reduce that anxiety level. And then the other one was the administrative burden. Of the 250 people that we surveyed that were either HR managers and directors or business owners, they felt that 1/3 of them felt they would have to hire an additional head to manage the different administrative burden, and I think on average they said that it would be an additional 8 hours, which is obviously a day's work a week, just to manage and kind of manage these processes. We deal with a lot of companies that potentially have got Google Sheets systems or all sorts of systems that have been kind of dreamed up by their IT departments, and a system like ours would certainly help manage that process. I think the main important thing, we spoke earlier about data, and it's about giving you that data on an organizational level.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Pete. And that, again, I think it's great to see some new technologies are coming in. I'd now like to invite Marc Silvester to join and to kind of just explore a little bit more from an internal perspective, but what is the role of the CIO, the CTO, and how do they actually add value?
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for inviting me back. So I've been a CIO, CTO for, around about 34 years now in one shape or form or another. And so I've seen many waves of change coming through both those roles and also where technology drives to make change. And so I would say, to answer your question, Richard, the role of the CIO, CTO really has a sole purpose of understanding what the business does in quite some detail and understanding how the business performs its activity, and what solutions are required to achieve the business strategy. And when you see some of the challenges that we get involved in, you see a disconnect between the IT organization and the business, not communicating, not getting down to a simple level of understanding, and not coming up with solutions that are fit for purpose rather than big wheeled-in projects. And so CTOs obviously have got to focus on product companies. CIOs tend to be information and internal orientated. But the role really is to get in front of the strategy, to inject practicality and technical know-how before it becomes a roadmap that has to get delivered at the back end. And so it's really important for those that are in those roles to participate in the business and translate the business objectives into real practical outcomes.
I'd like to invite Shamus to join us now and just kind of explore the whole area a little bit more around that relationship between the CTO and others on the management team. Could be the head of innovation, could be the leader, and how the management team can be helped by technology, and that could be data, or it could be any other aspect of technology. So please welcome Shamus.
We in NGB talk about bridges and shapers, and those are the people who understand technology but also understand the business. So whether you're working in legal or audit or tax, you need people who understand the business and but also understand a sufficient amount of technology to be able to make that bridge across. And that's especially important at the moment as we see so many changes in the underlying technology. Not only have we got kind of artificial intelligence and everything that comes with that, we now have these things called knowledge graphs, which Google uses and Netflix use and etc. And we're starting to use as well, coming in. And so people need to understand the different technologies, not because they want to go around with a technology looking for a problem, but they need to be able to talk to the business and understand what the business needs are, and actually how would you improve the business, take friction out, which is basically hours of work, but also drive efficiency, potentially open up new services, etc. But you can only do that if you understand the technology sufficiently to create the bridge from the technology over to the business. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that our NGB is all about cleaning up corporate data, and I've always said corporate data is really quite poor. If you pull data out of your finance systems, your contract systems, your clients' lease documents, or so you want to look at the lease contracts, etc. Those contracts, there are going to be several versions of that contract, and actually nobody knows which one's the one which is currently in place. So client data is very poor, and I know Pete talked briefly about data, but getting a grip on client data, making sure it's clean, or making sure you understand where it's come from, ratifying it with other data so you can cross-check the quality of that data, means that as these other technologies around AI and graph come into play, and you've got the use cases, you've got the data, and you've got the technology coming together. And so I'm a strong believer in these things called bridges or shapers. I actually call them shapers. Google calls them bridges, so I can probably give in and call them bridges, actually. So that's the key going forward as far as I'm concerned.
That's fascinating. What I'd like to do now is invite Derek to join us. And Derek is has an interesting background because lawyer and then very involved in legal and now delivery and now. And Derek, we're just talking. We mentioned AI there, and I think a lot of people are still a bit sort of feeling a bit, oh my God, what's all that all about? And my question was very simple one: Are we looking at an AI tsunami or another AI winter, or is it not that dramatic?
Thanks, Richard. And Derek Southall, Hyperscale Group, sort of 25 years in legal tech. I'd probably, if I was being negative, I'd probably say it was neither, but probably almost like a death by a thousand cuts, and it'd be like a sort of series of developments. I think the reality, if you were to summarize what AI is doing in this market, I think you'd probably say one thing that isn't happening, and then four things that are. So I think that the key thing is that relating to what's not happening is that the field of dreams approach to AI is dead. You know, we will invest in some £100,000 in building this massive machine, use it, it'll be fabulous. And then the market's been burnt by that. People haven't seen the returns. They've recognised the purpose of documents or the time to train these things up. So that isn't working. What is working, I can see, is 4 things. We're starting to see AI embedded in really useful. So some of the playbook products have got some embedded AI. It's more turnkey. This could be in products such as some of the big 4 of issue, IFRS 16, or products like Avail. It's almost turnkey. AI it's beginning to have an impact. Is some of the stuff that Microsoft had in 365. You know, there's a massive capability stack there. There's AI. Automate some of the stuff to do with Cortex and Syntax is and again it's already, if you like, available to people and they've got their data, so it's just you start to see people develop a piece of they're engaging with third-party humans to deliver a result, and that's particularly the corporate. So I think we are going to see the continued march of AI. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but probably the winning strategies are different, perhaps, to some of the strategies that people started out working with that have proved to be just very difficult, quite expensive to implement.
Yeah, no, I love and respect Derek, and I think he's exactly right. So there is we've had the hype.
See Sebastian. Sorry,
we're in catch-up mode to the hype, I think, actually, to be fair, and we're having narrow AI, and Engine B is all about AI and graphs, but we're also completely in bed with Microsoft work, the Microsoft engineers on knowledge graphs and AI. And so I think Derek's absolutely right. Some of the work that Microsoft is doing is really quite impressive. But I actually think it's about demand and supply. So the demand's there, and it's going to increase as people want to digitalize more. And we spend about 20% of C-suite time talking to regulators, associations, and governments around the world. And you can see they are waiting to kind of force more use of digital, especially through the kind of GC space and the audit space. So the demand's there. We just need to be realistic about the supply, and the supply's in catch-up mode with the hype, I think. But I think it will dramatically change in the next 2 years.
Sebastian, welcome. You've got a very good quality camera there, so you obviously sorted that one out brilliantly. Congratulations.
That's why it took so long.
Sebastian has a very interesting role within KPMG globally, and what I'm really interested in is the sort of the way that innovation and tech kind of interface. And in your role, which is working not just with KPMG, with other professional firms as well, but where do you see the drivers? Where does tech fit into that conversation? Should we be focused on the innovation side, or is the tech just as important in your view?
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thanks for inviting me back. Really pleased to be here. I think what we're seeing in the market in general is a different conception of how we deliver services to clients and how we think about delivering value to clients. And that comes down to breaking down what professionals do into delivering solutions that are composed out of the professionals and their expertise, but also how we deliver, which data we bring to the table, which insights we leverage, and then naturally also which technologies are used for this, and whether that is underpinned by internal capabilities or external ones. So I think this decomposition of professional services, legal services, consulting that's happening across our industry is naturally driving technology to the center of attention. And when I look at the innovation pipeline that I have some insight into at KPMG, I would say there's almost not a single client-facing innovation that we're currently driving that doesn't involve technology. I wouldn't say that it's all driven by technology, but I would say that it's become a natural part of it. And only because we're using technology, by the way, doesn't mean that we invented or that we have become a software company. I think we have learned over the years that this is probably not a good idea. But instead, we're much more open to leverage what others are doing in the market, and where we need to collaborate, maybe even cross-industry, like in the case of Engine B, or where we need to leverage the capabilities of big tech providers like Microsoft and co, or where it really makes sense that we invest our own time and money to build our IP, which by the way is something that really needs to show up on the balance sheets of professional service firms, I think, going forward.
Great. Managing Partners Forum is, as you're well aware, a group of managing partners and senior C-suite members. And certainly what I've seen is a lot of the tech focus has been around the client issues and delivering the client agenda. I mean, perhaps turn to Derek, and just to what extent do you see these new technologies helping the management team in its roles?
Thanks, Richard. I think they're beginning to. I mean, there's an irony about legal tech, say, in the last 30 years, where virtually all of the focus has been on things like practice management systems and document email management systems. But fundamentally, that area hasn't been solved. There's very little data, very little workflow, very little support business services. So there's a lot to go at. I think some of the solutions, you are beginning to see some things which can be of wider help. So just when you look at a few things specifically, you're starting to see end-to-end case management systems being applied across firms, which would have been a smaller firm model, which now a lot of law firms are looking at, because you've got to drive workflow, you've got to drive dashboards, got to drive reporting. You're starting to see some no-code systems with technology firms to enable quicker deployment and management data. You're starting to see CRM, marketing function. Tools like no-code platforms, app platforms like Fliplet are being used again for fee earner busyness, return to office. Tools like Loopio in terms of pitch generation. So dare I say, there's a lot coming in. An interesting tool that's washing through at the moment, I think there's a US tool called Foundation Software, solving a number of problems. So it's actually sort of giving almost like a low-level matter management system, but is also supplying pitch credentials, experience, pricing. I think for the first time in quite a few years, you're starting now to see a lot of these tools beginning to add real value to the management functions.
Could I bring Marc in now? Marc does a lot of work with boards to help boards get their head around what technology is all about and where technology might be able to add value. And to say that boards are analytical rather than creative is probably a reasonable place to start. Marc, from that perspective of working with a lot of boards and trying to help them, what are you hearing from today's session that gives you positive feelings, and what are the things you're thinking, oh my God, nothing new here?
Thanks, Richard. So boards are obviously a collection of individuals with different experiences, and so as we sort of sit down and try and help them come together around making a change happen or identifying an opportunity, there are different disciplines that have got them to the table, and so a lot of time is spent really trying to get them to a common language, into the focused area of solving a problem. I think I would agree with Shamus and Derek. The AI side of things has come down the sort of hype cycle, and it's now starting to become relevant in those discussions, mainly around data liberation and getting data out of systems that are already there but don't know how to make the best use of it and how to expose it for new value and for new benefit. I think the other thing that's becoming quite relevant in the boards that we talk to is hiring of staff is quite difficult and quite time consuming, and there isn't enough staff of suitable skill going forward, and so automation in its widest sense, so process automation, workflow automation, security automation, data extraction sort of automation is quickly going up the agenda. It's probably number 2 on the board after security and business performance. And so the change is happening in terms of, what I would have probably classified as big monolithic IT, sort of 15 or so years ago to sort of agile bite-size solutions now, which are very, very much focused on the next sort of 12 weeks, 18 weeks worth of value that they generate. And so quite a different relationship is emerging between the tech savvy side of the table and the business savvy side of the table, which hasn't really been there, you know, in the previous years, but it's definitely growing quite quickly.
I think that technology will play a central role in shaping the future of our industry. And I think by now it is still treated very often as something that needs to run somewhere in the background. And I think, to me, the most important thing, and that has gotten more attention over the past 12 or 18 months naturally, is that technology is now an embedded part of how we deliver to clients. We can close down the office, but when we switch off our technology, then revenue is definitely gone and we can't deliver anymore. So if we treat it as a revenue enabler, possibly even a revenue driver, that needs to have implications across every management dimension of professional services. And I think it's up to us here to figure out how we define that and how we run the firms in the future.
Thanks very much. And just quickly, because we're now just about running up for time, if perhaps Shamus and then Pete would like to give us their final sort of quick thoughts from what you've heard in the session.
Yeah, so Richard, I think the one thing I think people should take away is, look, we now understand data and technology is important, but we must think about data. The technology at the moment is supporting business as usual in the way it works today. We need to think about where the actual problem is and solve with technology at the point of the problem. So whoever's drafting the contract or whatever, not necessarily just to support the current business model. That's my last thing to say, I think.
And Pete, quick thought from you.
Yeah, on a similar note, actually, I mean, it was interesting to say Sebastian earlier was looking around for technology from the marketplace as opposed to developing it yourself. You know, work out what your problem is and come up with something that can solve it, and then integrate it into everything else, rather than trying to create this one system that does absolutely everything. Because otherwise, you will end up with an NHS app that tries to do everything, doesn't quite do everything quite as well as it might. Okay in everything, as opposed to individual parts of it that do very well.
Although, I guess if you look at Derek's video, which he said called The Death of Legal Tech, and the fact that the big platforms are going to come along and sort out everything, maybe that is going to be the future. But on that happy note, we're now unfortunately out of time. I'd like to thank the panel very much for sharing their thoughts on technology and what can you say in 25 minutes. Actually, quite a lot, I think.